It's a pleasure being here. I'm really happy we made it. Some months ago, when we were really busy planning this conference, we didn't have any idea how big it would be, but I'm happy to be here today. I've been asked to give some few comments on the Arctic experience, and if you could utilize our experiences with especially the negotiation processes that we went through to establish and create the Arctic Council, not the Arctic Circle now, the Arctic Council. I will offer some few comments on that. But first, in my language, Greenlandic, pole, we call the pole, the North Pole we call Qalassuaq, the big belly button, the navel, the big navel. And talking about a good name for an organization, I don't know whether that would be a proposal. The big belly button or the navel, the certain navel or whatever. But it is also referring to, of course, that your own belly button is the hub of the universe. That's how you see the world, how you see the universe. It is from your own belly button. I was first introduced to the concept of the third pole actually here in Iceland when your conference was going on. Somewhere outside Reykjavik, President Krensson took me to the conference and told me you're going to see some interesting things and hear about some interesting views on another pole than the one you are used to talk about. So we went to that conference. That was the first time I learned to know about the third pole. There is, of course, a lot of differences, but also some few similarities between the Arctic and the Himalayan region. Especially for Greenland, it's a coastal island. Everybody lives at the coast, but in our country, the ice is also melting, but it goes directly out into the sea. And also another consequence of the melting ice is, as you know, and it's been said many times during the last few days, is that it uncovers the disappearance of the ice, discovers new opportunities with respect to mining or mineral resources. Now to the negotiation process of the creation of the Arctic Council. Actually, I think it's fair to say that the idea of forming the Arctic Council was generated by the international scientific cooperation on the Arctic. The scientist doesn't really need to have an excuse for cooperating. If they find an issue or a challenge interesting, they simply get together and discuss the issue. So I think it was kind of genius that the formation of the Arctic Council actually was founded on the work of scientists. So we didn't have the political approach, which is normally or usually a bit more complicated than actually cooperating on scientific research. So that was a big advantage that we had something to build on, and another similarity is that actually the member states of the Arctic Council are 8, like in the Himalayan region. And of course, you have to have some degree of common interests common goals, common grounds to talk on, to discuss on, and my role, or the indigenous representatives' roles, always been, of course, to address the livelihoods of those people actually living in the area. Our most important message is always that we want to raise our standards of living. We want to attract investments to the region. We want to share the same goods as everyone else on this globe. So during the lengthy negotiations, the political negotiations to create the Arctic Council, we were addressing some issues which I want to share with you the next few minutes. First of all, the Arctic Council is an intergovernmental decision body. And in order for the governments to maintain their integrity, they're of course always discussing the limitations of the mandate of the Arctic Council. So we had a lengthy discussion on that, actually, I don't know, 5 or 6 years on discussing the mandate of the Arctic Council. But when finally that was agreed upon, then the next item on our agenda was how the organization would work in general, and how to include the interests of the Arctic peoples. Many of the Arctic peoples are actually not sovereign states. I mean, ruled by local governments which doesn't have a status as a sovereign state. So the trick was kind of how do you incorporate entities like indigenous governments or indigenous peoples organizations within an intergovernmental body. And we, of course, pushed hard to sit at the table. And I must say that I think we should be proud of the results which derived from those negotiations. So now we have a group of what we call the permanent participants of the Arctic Council, which consist of indigenous peoples organizations. I don't quite remember what number they are today, maybe 10, who sits at the same table as the governments, take part in the decision processes without voting rights. But I mean, if it's a consensus forum, so what really counts is actually the debates which leads to the decisions. So we were quite content with that. And I think also, this is only guessing, but when the United Nations some years ago did form a new body, the Permanent Forum for the Indigenous Peoples, they were looking at how we did with the Arctic Council. So the model now is kind of exported into other areas and as a means to embrace interests of people concerned. And to me, this is one of the main things, that you actually allow people's concerns to sit at the table and discuss with whomever takes the decisions. So the role of indigenous peoples is important. And also we discussed the role of the scientists, the scientific research within the Arctic Council as a integral part of the operations of the Arctic Council. We have many discussions still about the roles of the NGOs. Some of those who are present in this room today also. And not to mention any names, but I would put it this way: some of the NGOs were more welcome than others. So that's basically how negotiations went and the compromises we went through to create a body which can act commonly in cases which are much bigger than one single state is able to cope with. And I heard the expressions today that the Arctic belongs to the whole world. I might agree into some degree, but still it is the government's concerns who takes the decisions on behalf of the peoples living in the area. And I would guess that also will be the case for the Himalayan region. In closing, I'll just encourage that you don't postpone the creation of a body too long. I think it's urgent, and people need to sit together at the same table to discuss the livelihoods of the peoples living in the Himalayan region.
Thank you.